The archaeological team from the Zephyrian Empire had been excavating the dead world of Kepler 442b for 3 solar cycles when they found her. Dr. Vexthera, the lead xenoarchaeologist, nearly dismissed the discovery as another piece of ancient technology when her scanning equipment detected the anomaly buried beneath layers of crystallized dust and debris. The planet had been lifeless for millennia, according to their records. The Zephyrians had cataloged it as another victim of the Great Silence, that mysterious period when dozens of civilizations across the galaxy had simply vanished without explanation. What remained were empty worlds, scattered ruins, and technological artifacts that even the most advanced species couldn't fully understand. Vexthera's 4 arms moved with practiced precision as she directed the excavation drones. Her species, like most members of the Galactic Council, had evolved from predatory stock. The Zephyrians were tall, lean beings with chitinous exoskeletons that gleamed purple-black in the artificial lighting of the dig site. Their large compound eyes could detect movement across vast distances, and their razor-sharp mandibles could tear through most organic materials with ease. The object they uncovered defied immediate classification. It appeared to be some kind of preservation chamber, roughly 2 meters in length, and constructed from materials that their scanners couldn't identify. The surface was smooth and pale, almost organic in appearance, yet harder than any known metal. Strange symbols covered its exterior, glowing with a faint blue light that pulsed in a rhythm eerily similar to a heartbeat. Team leader Vexthera called out her assistant, Crixtal, his voice transmitted through their neural communication network. The chamber appears to be intact. Energy readings suggest it's still active after all these millennia. Vexthera approached the artifact with the caution that had kept her alive through decades of exploring dangerous ruins. Her people had learned long ago that the remnants of extinct civilizations could be deadly. Too many archaeological teams had been lost to automated defense systems, booby traps, or technologies that interacted poorly with alien physiology. The chamber hummed with subtle energy as she drew closer. Through the transparent upper section, she could see something inside that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a being unlike anything in the galactic database. The creature was small by galactic standards, perhaps 1.5 meters tall, with pale skin that looked impossibly fragile. Its limbs were thin and seemed almost weak, lacking the natural armor, claws, or defensive adaptations that characterized every known sapient species. Most peculiar were its features. The being had only 2 eyes, positioned in the front of its head rather than arranged for maximum field of vision like any sensible predator or prey species. Its mouth was small, lacking visible fangs or cutting implements. There were no obvious weapons or defensive structures on its body at all. "What manner of creature is this?" Crixtal asked, his voice filled with scientific curiosity mixed with unease. "It appears completely defenseless. How could such a weak species have created technology this advanced?" Vexthera consulted her portable database, running the creature's features through every known taxonomic classification. The search came back empty. There's no record of this species anywhere in Council databases. The morphology is completely alien to anything we've encountered. She activated her recording equipment and began documenting the find. Archaeological log, solar cycle 847.3, Kepler 442b excavation. We have discovered what appears to be a preserved specimen of an unknown species within an advanced stasis chamber. The technology is beyond our current understanding, showing no signs of degradation despite an estimated age of at least 10,000 solar cycles. The implications were staggering. Every member species of the Galactic Council had evolved along similar paths. They were hunters, warriors, survivors who had clawed their way to the top of their respective food chains through strength, cunning, and aggression. Even the most peaceful current species, like the plant-based Verdani, possessed natural toxins and defensive capabilities that made them formidable when threatened. Yet this creature appeared to have none of these advantages. Its body seemed designed for a world without predators, without conflict, without the constant struggle for survival that shaped every known form of intelligent life. Perhaps it was a pet, suggested Crixtal, some kind of domesticated animal kept by the real builders of this technology. Vexteral wasn't convinced. The chamber was too sophisticated, too carefully designed for preservation. Whatever this being was, someone had considered it important enough to preserve with technology that surpassed anything the current galactic civilization could produce. She began a detailed scan of the chamber's exterior, looking for access panels or control interfaces. The symbols covering the surface seemed to shift and change as she watched, almost as if they were responding to her presence. Her universal translator, capable of deciphering most known languages and mathematical systems, produced only nonsensical output. The writing system is completely unknown, she reported. The symbols appear to be dynamic, possibly responding to external stimuli. I'm detecting quantum fluctuations in the chamber's structure that suggest it's actively monitoring our presence. This revelation sent a chill through both archaeologists. Active monitoring meant the possibility of active defenses. They had lost too many colleagues to ancient security systems that still functioned after millennia of neglect. Vextera ordered her team to fall back to minimum safe distance while she continued her examination. The chamber's energy readings were unlike anything in their technical databases. The power source appeared to be completely stable, showing no signs of decay or diminishment despite its age. Whatever technology kept this being in stasis was beyond their current scientific understanding. As the day's cycle progressed, more members of the archaeological team arrived to examine the find. Dr. Morgoth, a massive Krallian warrior scientist, towered over the chamber with his 3-meter frame. His people were among the most aggressive in the galaxy, having evolved from pack hunters on a world of perpetual warfare. Even he seemed unsettled by the small, fragile creature in the chamber. "This makes no evolutionary sense," he rumbled, his deep voice carrying clearly in the thin atmosphere. "Look at it. No natural weapons, no armor, no obvious defensive capabilities. How could such a weak species survive long enough to develop advanced technology?" Dr. Celera, a serpentine Nagan whose people could inject deadly venom through their fanged mouths, coiled around the chamber for a better view. "Perhaps they were a slave species," she hissed, "created by their masters to serve some specific purpose." The theories multiplied as more specialists arrived. Each brought their own cultural biases and scientific expertise to bear on the mystery. The Volthree suggested the creature might be some kind of biological computer. The Thekmori hypothesized it could be a larvae form that would eventually metamorphose into something more recognizable. None of the theories felt right to Vextera. There was something about the being's posture, even in stasis, that suggested intelligence and purpose. Its hands, though lacking claws or other obvious tools, were positioned in a way that suggested they were capable of fine manipulation. The head was proportionally large, possibly indicating a significant brain capacity. As the local sun set and the dig site's artificial lighting activated, Vextera made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She ordered the chamber to be carefully extracted and transported to their research ship for more detailed analysis. The technology was clearly beyond their understanding, but perhaps their ship's advanced laboratories could provide more insight. The extraction process took most of the night cycle. The chamber was heavier than its size suggested, and their equipment struggled to lift it without damaging the delicate-looking exterior. Throughout the process, the blue symbols continued their rhythmic pulsing, as if the chamber was somehow aware of what was happening to it. Once aboard their research vessel, the Stellar Inquiry, Vextera had the chamber placed in the main laboratory under full containment protocols. She activated every scanner and analytical device at their disposal, hoping to unlock the secrets of the mysterious technology. The results were both fascinating and frustrating. The chamber seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, creating localized distortions that their instruments couldn't properly measure. The materials composing its structure appeared to be a composite of elements that shouldn't be able to exist in stable form under normal physical laws. Most disturbing of all was the realization that the chamber wasn't just preserving its occupant, it was actively maintaining and repairing the being at a cellular level. Microscopic examination revealed that the creature's tissues were being continuously regenerated, suggesting that whatever was inside might still be alive in some sense. "This changes everything," Vexthera whispered to her assistant as they reviewed the data. "If this being is still alive, if we could somehow communicate with it, we might finally learn what happened during the Great Silence." Krikstal's mandibles clicked nervously. "Should we attempt to revive it? The risks could be enormous. We don't know anything about this species' physiology or psychology." Before Vexthera could respond, every alarm on the ship began blaring simultaneously. Emergency lights bathed the laboratory in red illumination as the ship's AI announced a priority alert. "Unknown energy surge detected in Laboratory 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. Containment breach imminent." Vexthera and Krikstal turned toward the chamber in horror. The blue symbols were now blazing with brilliant light, and the entire structure was beginning to vibrate with increasing intensity. Whatever they had done by bringing the chamber aboard their ship, they had triggered something that had been dormant for millennia. As they backed toward the laboratory exit, Vexthera caught a glimpse of movement within the chamber. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw the creature's chest rise and fall in what looked distinctly like breathing. Then the lights went out, and in the darkness, she heard something that would echo in her nightmares for cycles to come. It was soft, barely audible over the ship's alarms, but unmistakably organic. The sound of someone taking their first breath in 10,000 years. The chamber had begun its awakening sequence, and whatever ancient safeguards had kept the mysterious being in stasis were finally failing. As emergency power flickered back online, Vexthera realized with growing dread that they might have just awakened something that the galaxy wasn't prepared to encounter. The fragile-looking creature in the chamber stirred slightly, and for the first time in millennia, alien eyes began to flutter beneath closed lids. Whatever this being was, whatever power it possessed that had warranted such careful preservation, was about to be unleashed upon an unsuspecting galaxy. In the sterile light of the laboratory, surrounded by the most advanced technology the current galactic civilization could produce, something ancient and potentially terrible was beginning to wake up. And Vexthera was starting to suspect that all their assumptions about weak, defenseless species might be tragically, catastrophically wrong. The evacuation of Laboratory 7 proceeded with military precision, but Vexthera found herself reluctant to abandon her discovery. Against all protocols and her assistant's frantic protests, she remained at the observation window, watching as the ancient chamber continued its awakening sequence. The energy emanating from the device was unlike anything in their scientific databases. It didn't register as electromagnetic radiation, gravitational waves, or any known form of quantum field manipulation. Yet somehow it was affecting every system on the ship. Navigation computers were reporting impossible readings. The gravity generators were fluctuating randomly, and their communications array was receiving signals from empty space. "Dr. Vexthera, you must evacuate immediately," Captain Thorgax commanded through the intercom. The massive Corellian's voice carried the authority of someone who had survived 3 interstellar wars. "Whatever this device is doing, it's destabilizing our core systems." Through the reinforced observation window, Vexthera watched in fascination as the chamber's interior began to change. The blue symbols were now flowing like liquid light across its surface, rearranging themselves into new patterns that hurt to look at directly. Her trained xenoarchaeologist mind raced to document every detail, even as part of her consciousness screamed warnings about things that should not be witnessed. The being inside was definitely moving now. What she had initially taken for primitive biological functions was revealing itself to be something far more complex. The creature's breathing had synchronized with the chamber's energy pulses, creating a resonance that was affecting the ship's quantum field generators. Impossible readings from a laboratory, reported the ship's chief science officer over the communication system. The entity appears to be generating localized space-time distortions. Our sensors are detecting temporal anomalies within a 3-meter radius of the chamber. Vextara's 4 hands moved rapidly across her portable scanner, trying to record as much data as possible before she was forced to evacuate. What she was seeing challenged everything she understood about physics and biology. The creature's cellular structure was becoming visible through some kind of biometric resonance with their equipment, and the readings were extraordinary. The being's neural activity was unlike anything in the galactic database. Instead of the standard electrical patterns that characterized all known sapient species, its brain was generating what appeared to be quantum coherence fields. These fields extended beyond the physical boundaries of its skull, creating interference patterns with the ship's own quantum systems. Most disturbing of all was the gradual realization that the chamber wasn't just a preservation device. It was some kind of containment system designed to limit and control the being's natural abilities. As the awakening process continued, hairline cracks were beginning to appear in the chamber's seemingly indestructible surface. Dr. Vextara, the chamber's structural integrity is failing, Krixtal reported from the hallway outside the laboratory. Our engineering team estimates complete containment failure within the next standard hour. The implications hit Vextara like a physical blow. If the chamber was designed to contain this being's abilities, and if those abilities were powerful enough to affect advanced technology from a distance, then what would happen when the containment failed completely? She activated her emergency communication link to the bridge. "Captain, we need to contact the Galactic Council immediately. This discovery could represent a threat to interstellar security." "Negative, Doctor," Captain Thorgax replied. "Our communication systems are experiencing severe interference from your archaeological specimen. We're completely cut off from external communications until we can resolve the situation." As if responding to their conversation, the being in the chamber suddenly opened its eyes. Vextara had studied thousands of different species throughout her career, but she had never seen eyes like these. They were a pale blue color that seemed to contain depths that extended far beyond the physical limitations of optical organs. When they focused on her through the observation window, she felt a sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't telepathy exactly. Her people had encountered several telepathic species, and the sensation was always one of mental intrusion or foreign thoughts pressing against her consciousness. This was different. It felt like recognition, as if something vast and ancient was taking note of her presence. The being sat up slowly within the failing chamber, movements careful and deliberate despite having been in stasis for millennia. Its pale skin seemed to glow with an internal light, and Vextara noticed that the air around it was shimmering with barely visible energy patterns. "Fascinating," she whispered into her recorder. "The subject appears to be fully conscious and aware of its surroundings. Motor functions seem completely intact despite extended stasis. No visible signs of disorientation or confusion." The creature turned its head toward her, and Vextara felt that strange sense of recognition intensify. When it smiled, a simple, apparently friendly expression with its small mouth, the effect on the ship's systems was immediate and dramatic. Every light on the vessel flickered in perfect synchronization. The gravity generators stabilized instantly, providing the smoothest artificial gravity field Vextara had ever experienced. Most remarkably, their communication systems suddenly burst to life with crystal-clear signals from across the galaxy. "Captain," she called urgently. "The subject appears to be exerting some kind of benevolent influence on our technology. Ship's systems are operating at peak efficiency." "Confirmed," came the reply from a bridge. "All systems showing optimal performance parameters." "What did that thing do?" Before Vextara could respond, the chamber's final containment seals dissolved like mist. The being stood up gracefully, apparently unaffected by the ship's artificial gravity, and stepped out of the device that had held it for thousands of years. It was smaller than she had estimated, perhaps only 1.5 meters tall, but its presence filled the laboratory in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. When it spoke, its voice carried clearly through the observation window, despite the sealed environment. "Hello," it said in perfect galactic standard, though Vextera was certain no translation equipment could account for such immediate linguistic comprehension. "My name is Sarah Chun. I believe we need to talk." The simplicity of the statement was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. This being had awakened after millennia in stasis, immediately mastered their language, and was now suggesting a casual conversation as if nothing unusual had occurred. Vextera's training as a xenoarchaeologist warred with her growing fear. Every instinct told her to flee, to get as far away from this impossible creature as the ship's engine systems would allow. But her scientific curiosity demanded answers. "I'm Dr. Vextera of the Zephyrin Archaeological Institute," she replied through the intercom. "Can you understand me?" Sarah nodded, and the gesture seemed to carry weight beyond its simple meaning. "I can understand you perfectly. I can also understand your fear, and I want you to know that it's entirely reasonable under the circumstances." The being human she had called herself began to examine the laboratory equipment with obvious interest. Her movements were fluid and precise, suggesting a level of coordination that spoke of advanced motor control. When she touched one of their quantum scanners, the device immediately began displaying readings that their best scientists couldn't have produced. "Your technology is impressive," Sarah continued conversationally. "Quantum field manipulation, artificial gravity, faster-than-light communication. You've progressed quite far since my time." "Since your time?" Vextera repeated, her voice barely steady. "How long have you been in that chamber?" Sarah paused in her examination of their equipment, and for a moment her expression became distant, almost sad. "Approximately 10,473 years by your calendar system. Give or take a few decades, the quantum stasis field isn't perfectly precise." The number hit Vextera like a physical blow. 10,000 years predated every known galactic civilization. It placed this being's species among the mysterious civilizations that had vanished during the Great Silence, possibly even before it. "That's impossible," she whispered. "No organic being can survive that long, even in the most advanced stasis systems." Sarah's smile was gentle, but somehow infinitely sad. "You're thinking about this incorrectly, Dr. Vextera. The chamber wasn't designed to preserve my body. It was designed to contain something much more dangerous." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering directly, Sarah gestured toward the laboratory's main display screen. Without touching any controls, the display activated and began showing star charts of the local galactic region. The detail was extraordinary, far beyond what their navigation systems could produce. "Tell me," Sarah said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "what do your histories say about the Great Silence? About what happened to the civilizations that came before you?" Vextera found herself answering despite every security protocol screaming at her to remain silent. "The records are fragmentary. Dozens of advanced civilizations simply vanished over a period of several thousand years. No wars, no natural disasters that we can identify. They just stopped existing." Sarah nodded grimly. "They didn't stop existing, Doctor. They were removed." The star chart on the display screen began to change, showing the positions of stellar systems over historical time periods. Vextera watched in growing horror as system after system simply disappeared from the display, their stars going dark in a pattern that spread across the galaxy like some kind of cosmic plague. "Removed by whom?" Vextera asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Sarah turned to face her directly, and Vextera saw something in those pale blue eyes that made her species' predatory instincts scream warnings. It wasn't malevolence, exactly, but it was power on a scale that defied comprehension. "By me," Sarah said simply. "By my species. By humanity." The laboratory fell silent, except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Vextera stared at the small, apparently fragile being standing calmly among their most advanced scientific equipment, trying to process what she had just heard. You're saying that your species was responsible for the disappearance of dozens of galactic civilizations? Not exactly, Sarah replied, her expression becoming even more troubled. We didn't make them disappear. We made them never have existed in the first place. The distinction was lost on Vexthera, but she sensed that it was important to this strange being. I don't understand. Sarah sighed, and the sound seemed to carry the weight of millennia. Humanity discovered something that we probably shouldn't have, Dr. Vexthera. We learned how to manipulate the fundamental structure of reality itself. And, like every species that gains access to power beyond their wisdom, we made terrible mistakes. The star chart display shifted again, now showing not just spatial positions, but temporal probability streams. Vexthera's mind reeled as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. The display was mapping not just where civilizations had existed, but when they had existed and how their timelines had been altered. We were trying to prevent a galactic war, Sarah continued, her voice filled with ancient regret. Several of the major powers were developing weapons that could have sterilized entire sectors. So we intervened. We reached back through time and made small changes, subtle alterations that would prevent the conflicts from ever beginning. Temporal manipulation, Vexthera breathed. You're talking about temporal manipulation on a galactic scale. The greatest mistake in human history, Sarah confirmed. Each intervention required more interventions to maintain stability. Each change created new timelines that had to be corrected. Eventually, we realized that the only way to prevent galactic catastrophe was to remove certain species from the timeline entirely. Vexthera felt her legs weaken, and she gripped the observation window for support. You eliminated entire civilizations from history itself. We told ourselves it was mercy, Sarah said, and for the first time her voice cracked with emotion. Quick, painless, leaving no orphan species or devastated worlds. They simply never evolved in the first place. No suffering, no loss, no memory of what might have been. The full horror of what she was hearing began to dawn on Vexthera. The Great Silence hadn't been a mysterious catastrophe. It had been the systematic editing of galactic history by a species with the power to reshape reality itself. But the intervention had unexpected consequences, Sarah continued. Removing so many species from the timeline created quantum instabilities that threatened to unravel the entire galactic cluster. We realized that we had to stop, had to accept that the remaining civilizations would have to find their own path through the coming conflicts. So what happened to your people? Vexthera managed to ask. Sarah's expression became infinitely sad. We made one final intervention. We removed ourselves from the timeline, ensuring that humanity would never develop temporal manipulation technology. The process required volunteers to serve as quantum anchors, maintaining the stability of the new timeline while remaining outside of it. Understanding crashed over Vexthera like a cold wave. You're one of the anchors. The last one, Sarah confirmed. My companions have been dying one by one over the millennia, their quantum matrices finally succumbing to temporal decay. When the last anchor fails, all the changes we made will become permanent and irreversible. And you've been in stasis all this time, maintaining the timeline. Sarah shook her head. I've been in stasis, maintaining the possibility that our changes could be undone, that the species we erased could be restored, that the damage we caused could be repaired. She gestured toward the laboratory equipment around them, and Vexthera noticed for the first time that several of the devices were showing readings that seemed to violate basic physics. Your discovery of my chamber has created a quantum resonance cascade, Sarah explained. My awakening is destabilizing the temporal locks that keep the altered timeline in place. Soon, very soon, everything we changed will begin to unravel. Is that good or bad? Vexthera asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Sarah's smile was grim. That depends entirely on whether the current galactic civilizations can survive the return of the species that were powerful enough to threaten them in the first place, and whether they can survive the attention of beings who developed temporal manipulation technology millions of years ago. As if responding to her words, every alarm on the ship began sounding again. But this time, the alerts weren't about system malfunctions. They were detecting massive spatial distortions throughout the local star system, the telltale signatures of something very large entering normal space from somewhere else entirely. Through the laboratory's viewport, Vextera could see stars beginning to shift in the sky, their light bending in ways that hurt to observe directly. Reality itself was starting to come undone, and standing calmly in the center of it all was a small, seemingly fragile human who held the power to rewrite the universe. The great silence was ending, and Vextera was beginning to understand why some species might need to be contained. The spatial distortions intensified with each passing moment, and Vextera watched in horrified fascination as chunks of space-time began folding in on themselves around their ship. Through the laboratory viewport, she could see impossible geometries forming in the void between stars, structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than her mind could process. Sarah Chun stood motionless in the center of the laboratory, her pale blue eyes closed in concentration. Energy patterns flowed around her like visible music, and Vextera realized that the human was somehow holding the cascading temporal collapse in check through sheer force of will. "What's happening out there?" Captain Thorgax's voice crackled through the intercom, distorted by the reality fluctuations affecting their communication systems. "Timeline restoration," Sarah replied without opening her eyes. 10,000 years of alterations are trying to reassert themselves simultaneously. The quantum matrices that held the changes in place are collapsing. Vextera activated her recording equipment, though she doubted any of this could be properly documented. "Dr. Chun, is there anything we can do to help stabilize the situation?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and exhausted. "Unless your species has developed mastery over the fundamental forces of causality, I'm afraid not. This is something only a human consciousness can manage, and barely at that." Through the ship's sensors, Vextera began to detect new contacts appearing throughout the star system. They weren't ships in any conventional sense, but rather areas of space where matter and energy behaved according to different physical laws. Some appeared as geometric structures that hurt to look at directly. Others manifested as regions where time flowed backwards or where gravity pushed instead of pulled. "Dr. Vextera," Crickstall's voice reached her from the corridor outside, filled with barely controlled panic. "Our sensors are detecting multiple civilization-class entities entering the system. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases." Sarah's eyes snapped open, and Vextera saw something in them that made her species' ancient flight instinct scream warnings. "They're not entering the system," the human corrected grimly. "They're remembering that they were always here." The main display screen activated without any input from the ship's crew, now showing tactical readings of the approaching entities. What Vextera saw defied every assumption about space warfare and civilization-level technology that the galactic community had developed over millennia. The first entity appeared to be a living stellar construct, a being that existed as organized plasma and magnetic fields spanning several million kilometers. Its consciousness extended through solar wind patterns that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level across interplanetary distances. The second was even more disturbing, a collective intelligence that existed as pure information, inhabiting the quantum vacuum itself. It could manifest physically by organizing virtual particles into temporary matter states, creating and destroying worlds as easily as thinking a thought. Most terrifying of all was the third entity, which their sensors could barely detect because it existed primarily in temporal dimensions. It appeared as a shadow cast by events that had never happened, a civilization that had learned to survive by becoming a paradox. "These are the species you erased from history," Vextera whispered, watching the impossible beings take shape in the space around their ship. "3 of them," Sarah confirmed. "The ones whose removal created the greatest temporal instability. Their restoration is pulling other changes along with it, creating a cascade effect that could rewrite the entire galactic timeline. The ship shuddered as one of the entities directed its attention toward them. Vextera felt pressure against her consciousness that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't telepathy or psychic intrusion, but rather the attention of something so vast and complex that her mind could only perceive it as overwhelming presence. Sarah Chun, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, spoke directly into their thoughts. The last anchor. We remember you now, as we remember everything that was taken from us. Sarah straightened, and Vextera was startled to see tears streaming down the human's face. I'm sorry, she said simply. We thought we were preventing galactic war. We didn't understand the consequences of temporal intervention on such a scale. The presence shifted, and Vextera felt analysis beyond anything her species could comprehend. These beings were examining not just their physical forms, but their genetic histories, their evolutionary timelines, the quantum probability states that had led to their current existence. You were children playing with forces beyond your understanding. Another voice added, this one carrying the weight of geological ages. But the damage has been done. The question now is whether it can be repaired without destroying the civilizations that emerged in our absence. Through the viewport, Vextera could see more entities materializing throughout the system. She watched a machine intelligence that existed as self-replicating mathematical equations take physical form by convincing matter that it should behave according to different logical principles. Nearby, a species that had evolved beyond physical existence manifested as probability waves that could alter the fundamental constants of physics within their sphere of influence. How many species did you remove? Vextera asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 237 confirmed erasures, Sarah replied, her voice heavy with millennia of guilt. Each one removed to prevent conflicts that we calculated would lead to galactic sterilization. We thought we were saving lives. Instead, you saved the galaxy for us, Vextera whispered, the implications crashing over her like a tide. Every current galactic civilization had evolved in the ecological niche left by humanity's intervention. They were living in a universe artificially cleared of its apex predators. The stellar entity's attention focused on their ship, and Vextera felt heat building in the hull plating despite their thermal shields. When it spoke, its voice was like solar winds given voice. The young species show promise, it observed, apparently discussing the current galactic civilizations. They have developed functional interstellar cooperation without external intervention. This was not possible in our original timeline. Because you wouldn't let it be possible, Sarah replied with surprising firmness. Your species were too powerful, too aggressive, too willing to impose your will on younger civilizations. The galactic wars were inevitable because none of you could conceive of true equality. The temperature around their ship spiked dangerously, and Vextera realized that Sarah had just challenged a being that could casually manipulate stellar fusion. But instead of anger, she felt something like grudging respect from the vast intelligence. You speak truth, last anchor. We were what we were. But removal from the timeline has granted us perspective. We have experienced non-existence, felt the universe continue without us. It has been educational. A new voice joined the conversation, this one carrying harmonics that suggested communication across multiple dimensional states. The question remains, can coexistence be achieved now that we have returned? The young species occupy our former territories, use resources we once claimed, exist in spaces we once dominated. Vextera felt her hearts racing as she realized these beings were discussing the fate of every current galactic civilization. Her people, the Croelians, the Nagan, the Volthri, all of them might be wiped out simply because they existed in space that had once belonged to others. May I suggest an alternative? Sarah said, stepping forward despite the immense energies swirling around the laboratory. Instead of reclaiming your former territories, why not explore new possibilities? The universe has expanded significantly in your absence. There are entire galactic clusters that were never touched by the old conflicts. The machine intelligence that existed as mathematical equations manifested a form that resembled a geometric crystal large enough to dwarf planets. Expansion into virgin territory is possible, it calculated aloud. But the young species possess technologies we find interesting. Cooperation might prove more beneficial than displacement. Vextera found herself speaking before she could stop herself. What kind of cooperation? The attention of all the returned entities focused on her, and she immediately regretted drawing their notice. But Sarah nodded encouragingly, and somehow that gave her the courage to continue. Our technologies are primitive compared to yours, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But we've developed something you never had the opportunity to create, true interspecies cooperation. The Galactic Council represents 47 different species working together peacefully. 47 species with similar evolutionary backgrounds. The temporal paradox entity observed, its voice echoing from moments that had never occurred. All predators, all competitors, all shaped by survival pressures. Cooperation among truly diverse intelligences has never been attempted. But it could be, Sarah added, and Vextera heard hope in the human's voice for the first time since her awakening. The current galactic civilizations could serve as mediators, bridges between different forms of existence. They've already proven that former enemies can become allies. The stellar entity's plasma fields fluctuated in what might have been consideration. An intriguing proposal. We could explore this cooperation concept without the pressure of territorial competition. The young species could benefit from our knowledge, while we learn from their social innovations. And if conflicts arise, the information entity asked, its question manifesting as quantum interference patterns. The old problems that led to the temporal intervention could resurface. Sarah's expression became determined. Then, we solve them without rewriting history. Conflicts are part of existence, but genocide doesn't have to be. We've all learned something during the years of separation. Vextera watched in amazement as these godlike beings actually seemed to be considering peaceful coexistence with the current galactic civilizations. The very concept would have been dismissed as impossible just hours ago. A trial period, the machine intelligence suggested. Limited contact, carefully monitored interactions, gradual integration of technologies and perspectives. If successful, we could avoid the catastrophic conflicts that originally necessitated temporal intervention. And if unsuccessful, Sarah asked, the silence that followed was heavy with implications. Finally, the temporal paradox entity spoke, its voice carrying echoes of futures that might never be. Then, we will face the choice our ancestors could not, whether to fight for dominance or find new paths through the darkness. But this time we make that choice with full understanding of what we lost when war became the only option. The energy patterns around Sarah began to stabilize, and Vextera realized that the timeline cascade was slowing. The human had somehow negotiated a temporary ceasefire in what could have been the greatest conflict in galactic history. The temporal locks are stabilizing at a new equilibrium, Sarah announced. Both timelines will exist simultaneously until the trial period concludes. The returning civilizations will have limited access to their full capabilities, while current species maintain their territorial and political structures. How long for this trial period? Vextera asked. 100 of your standard years, the stellar entity decided. Sufficient time for meaningful contact, but not so long that stagnation becomes inevitable. At the end of this period, all parties will decide whether permanent coexistence is possible. And if we decide it isn't, Sarah's smile was sad but determined. Then, I will complete my function as the last anchor and make the changes permanent. Either the current timeline will be preserved or the original will be fully restored. But there will be no more intervention, no more editing of history. The choice will belong to all of us together. As the immediate crisis stabilized, Vextera began to realize the magnitude of what had just been negotiated. Her species and all current galactic civilizations had just been granted a century to prove they could coexist with beings whose power dwarfed their own. The Great Silence was truly ending, but instead of catastrophe, there was possibility. The universe was about to become a far stranger and more dangerous place, but also potentially more wondrous than anyone had dared imagine. Outside the viewport, impossible geometries were settling into stable configurations, and beings of living mathematics were beginning to explore the curious technologies of species they had never encountered. The greatest experiment in galactic history was about to begin, mediated by a small human woman who carried the weight of temporal manipulation in her fragile-looking hands. Vextera activated her recording equipment again, documenting the moment when everything changed. Whatever happened next, it would be the result of choice rather than erasure. And for the first time since discovering the ancient chamber, she felt something that might have been hope. 6 months had passed since the Great Awakening, as the galactic media had dubbed the return of the erased civilizations. The Stellar Inquiry had become an unlikely diplomatic vessel, serving as neutral ground for the most important negotiations in galactic history. Dr. Vextera stood in what had once been Laboratory 7, now converted into a multi-dimensional conference chamber capable of hosting beings that existed across different states of reality. The space had been modified with technology that blended current galactic engineering with principles donated by the returned entities, creating an environment where plasma beings could coexist with quantum intelligences and temporal paradoxes. Sarah Chan sat at the center of it all, no longer the mysterious artifact they had discovered, but recognized now as the most important individual in the galaxy. The human had aged visibly during the months of constant negotiation and temporal stabilization, her pale features showing the strain of maintaining the delicate balance between two competing timelines. The resource allocation proposals are proceeding better than expected, reported Ambassador Kethra, a Nagan diplomat whose species had been among the first to establish formal contact with the returned civilizations. The stellar entities have agreed to limit their expansion to uninhabited systems, while the machine intelligences are sharing computational resources with our research institutions. Vextera consulted her datapad, reviewing the latest reports from across the galaxy. The picture they painted was complex, but cautiously optimistic. Not every first contact had gone smoothly. There had been 3 minor incidents where misunderstandings had nearly escalated to violence, but each crisis had been resolved through negotiation rather than conflict. The Verdani report that collaboration with the information entity has accelerated their botanical research by several centuries, she added. They've successfully created plant species that can survive in quantum vacuum conditions, opening up entirely new possibilities for terraforming. Sarah smiled, and Vextera was pleased to see that it reached her eyes for the first time in months. Dr. Chun, your species' ability to facilitate cooperation between wildly different forms of intelligence continues to amaze us. It's not just humanity, Sarah replied modestly. Current galactic civilization has developed social technologies that my people never achieved. You've learned to see strength in diversity rather than threat. The conference chamber shimmered as one of the temporal paradox entities manifested for the daily coordination meeting. Its presence was always unsettling, existing as it did in multiple timeline states simultaneously, but Vextera had grown accustomed to the disorientation. Progress report from the Outer Rim territories, it announced, its voice echoing from moments that existed in parallel probability streams. The Krylian military has successfully integrated phase shift technology into their peacekeeping operations. Conflicts that would have required planetary bombardment can now be resolved with localized temporal containment. This was perhaps the most remarkable development of all. The warlike Krylians, who had solved most problems through application of superior firepower, had embraced technologies that made violence obsolete. When you could temporarily isolate hostile forces in pocket timelines, allowing them to exhaust their aggression in spaces where no lasting damage could occur, traditional warfare became pointless. Any resistance to the integration programs? Sarah asked, though Vexthera could tell she already knew the answer. Less than projected, the machine intelligence reported, its geometric form shifting through mathematical configurations that represented complex probability analyses. Approximately 12% of current galactic populations express anxiety about coexistence with returned entities, but this decreases to 3% among individuals who have participated in direct collaboration projects. Vexthera wasn't surprised. Working alongside beings of immense power had a way of dispelling fear once you realized they were more interested in exploring new possibilities than dominating lesser species. The stellar entity currently collaborating with the Zephyrin Archaeological Institute had proven to be endlessly patient with their questions, sharing insights about cosmic evolution that had revolutionized their understanding of the universe. Captain's report from the Galactic Council session announced Captain Thorgax as he entered the chamber. The massive Corellian had adapted to their new reality with the pragmatism typical of his species. All 47 member species have voted to extend preliminary cooperation agreements with returned entities. The formal integration referendum is scheduled for next solar cycle. Opposition parties? Sarah inquired. The traditionalist faction maintains that coexistence with beings of such power is fundamentally unstable, Thorgax replied. They argue that current galactic civilization should prioritize defensive technologies rather than collaboration. This was the other side of the equation that Vexthera had been monitoring closely. Not every species was comfortable with the new reality. The hegemony of pure thought, a coalition of the galaxy's most xenophobic civilizations, had refused all contact with returned entities and was actively developing what they called temporal isolation technology. Any indication they planned to escalate their resistance? Vexthera asked. Intelligence suggests they're attempting to reverse engineer stasis technology, similar to what contained Dr. Chun. Thorgax reported grimly. Their goal appears to be creating a separate timeline where returned entities never existed. Sarah's expression darkened. That's not possible with their current technology, but the attempt could destabilize everything we've built. Temporal manipulation without proper understanding of causality mathematics could unravel both timelines. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They had spent months carefully balancing two competing realities, maintaining a delicate equilibrium that allowed both current and returned civilizations to coexist. Crude interference could collapse the entire structure, potentially destroying both timelines in the process. Options for intervention? The temporal paradox entity asked, its multiple timeline perspectives allowing it to see probability streams that were invisible to linear consciousness. Direct action against the hegemony would validate their fears, Sarah pointed out. They already believe that cooperation with returned entities is a form of subjugation. Heavy-handed responses would drive other species toward their position. Vexthera found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a simple archaeologist studying dead civilizations. Now, she was helping to negotiate the most complex political situation in galactic history, working alongside beings whose existence challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. What if we invited them to observe a demonstration? She suggested. Not forced cooperation, but a chance to see what's possible when different forms of intelligence work together. The Harmonic Convergence Project, Sarah said immediately, understanding where Vexthera's thoughts were leading. It's our most ambitious collaboration, and the results speak for themselves. The Harmonic Convergence Project had begun as an attempt to solve the universal translation problem. Current galactic civilization used mechanical translators that converted between different language systems, but communication with returned entities required something far more sophisticated. The project brought together linguistic experts from current species with information entities that existed as pure meaning. The results had exceeded every expectation. Instead of just solving the translation problem, they had developed a form of communication that conveyed not just words but complete conceptual frameworks. Ideas could be shared directly between minds, allowing for levels of understanding that had never been possible before. The demonstration is scheduled for next week, the machine intelligence noted. Full sensory integration test between a Vol3 consciousness and a living mathematics entity. If successful, it will represent the first true merger of organic and mathematical forms of awareness. Invite the hegemony to observe, Sarah decided. Make it clear that attendance is voluntary and that no pressure will be applied. Let them see for themselves what we're building. And if they refuse? Thorgax asked. Then, we continue building without them, Sarah replied firmly. We can't force cooperation, but we can demonstrate its benefits. Eventually, the practical advantages of integration will speak for themselves. Vexthera activated her recording equipment, documenting another historic moment. Archaeological log, solar cycle 847.9. The great integration continues to exceed projected parameters. Preliminary studies suggest that collaboration between current and returned civilizations is producing innovations that neither could achieve independently. She paused, watching Sarah work with the various entities to coordinate their next phase of development. The human had changed dramatically since her awakening, bearing the weight of galactic responsibility with a grace that Vexthera found inspiring. Personal note, she continued. Dr. Sarah Chun continues to serve as primary mediator between timeline states. Her unique position as humanity's representative grants her authority that transcends normal diplomatic protocols. Without her presence, it's unlikely that peaceful coexistence would be possible. This was the truth that none of them spoke aloud. Sarah wasn't just facilitating cooperation, she was personally maintaining the temporal balance that kept both realities stable. If anything happened to her, the careful equilibrium they had built would collapse, forcing a choice between permanent restoration of the original timeline or preservation of the current one. The burden you're carrying, Vexthera said quietly during a brief pause in the proceedings. No individual should have to bear such responsibility alone. Sarah's smile was tired, but genuine. I'm not alone. Every successful collaboration, every peaceful resolution, every moment of understanding between our peoples reduces the strain on the temporal matrix. The real burden belongs to all of us together. Is that why you're pushing so hard for integration? To distribute the responsibility? Partly, Sarah admitted, but mostly because I've seen what the alternative looks like. In the original timeline, the conflicts escalated until they consumed entire galactic regions. Billions of lives lost, civilizations reduced to radioactive ash, the survivors scattered and broken. This path, difficult as it is, offers hope for something better. The conference resumed, but Vexthera found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they were attempting. They weren't just negotiating peace between current and returned civilizations, they were pioneering an entirely new form of galactic society. Status report on the colonial integration programs. The stellar entity requested, its plasma fields fluctuating with what Vexthera had learned to recognize as curiosity. Extremely promising, replied Dr. Silera. Her serpentine form coiled around a specialized interface that allowed her to communicate directly with quantum-based intelligences. The joint colonies are showing productivity rates 30% higher than single-species settlements. This was another unexpected development. When different forms of consciousness work together, they didn't just solve problems more efficiently, they discovered entirely new ways of thinking about problems. Organic intuition combined with mathematical precision produced insights that neither could achieve alone. The Harmony Station project is ahead of schedule, added a representative from the Information Entity Collective. Integration of biological and quantum computational systems has created processing capabilities that exceed our projections by several orders of magnitude. Vexthera had visited Harmony Station the previous month, and the experience had been transformational. The station existed as both a physical construct and a quantum probability matrix, allowing beings of different dimensional states to interact naturally. Walking through its corridors, she had encountered forms of art, science, and philosophy that challenged every assumption about the nature of existence. Cultural exchange programs report similar success, Thorgax added. Current species are adapting returned technologies faster than anticipated, while returned entities are demonstrating unexpected appreciation for organic cultural expressions. This might have been the most remarkable development of all. The temporal paradox entities had become fascinated with Kryllian War poetry, finding beauty in the temporal echoes created by emotional expression. The machine intelligences had developed an obsession with Nagan sculpture, creating mathematical art forms that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. 6 months ago, we feared that coexistence would be impossible, Vexthera observed. Now we're creating forms of civilization that transcend anything either timeline achieved independently. The trial period has proven that cooperation is not only possible, but beneficial, Sarah agreed. The question now is whether we can make it permanent. The formal vote would take place in 18 months, when the 100-year trial period officially began. But already, the momentum was building toward full integration. Every successful collaboration strengthened the case for permanent coexistence, while every breakthrough demonstrated the potential of what they were building together. There will be challenges, the temporal paradox entity warned, its voice carrying echoes of possible futures. Not all returned civilizations will adapt to peaceful coexistence. Not all current species will embrace the changes required for true integration. But the alternative is clear, Sarah replied. Return to the old patterns of conflict and dominance, or forge new paths through cooperation and understanding. We've proven that the latter is possible. Now we have to prove it's sustainable. As the meeting concluded and the various entities departed for their respective domains, Vexthera found herself alone with Sarah in the conference chamber. The human was reviewing data streams that tracked the progress of integration programs across the galaxy, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever regret awakening? Vexthera asked. Your stasis could have continued indefinitely. You could have remained outside of time, free from the burden of choice. Sarah considered the question seriously. Sometimes, she admitted, the weight of maintaining timeline stability is exhausting, and there are moments when I wonder if we're building something beautiful or just postponing inevitable catastrophe. But then I see a Kryllian warrior learning mathematics from a living equation, or watch a stellar entity collaborate with organic archaeologists to unlock the secrets of cosmic evolution. And I know we're on the right path. This is what my species dreamed of when we first reached for the stars of the universe, as a place of infinite possibility rather than eternal conflict. Vexthera nodded, understanding. They were writing a new chapter in galactic history, one where diversity was strength rather than threat, where different forms of consciousness could coexist and thrive together. It wasn't easy, and success wasn't guaranteed, but the attempt itself was proof of how far they had come. Archaeological log. Final entry, she said into her recorder. The being we thought was a relic has proven to be a bridge to a future none of us could have imagined. The great integration continues, and with it, the promise of a galaxy where cooperation transcends the ancient cycles of conflict and domination. Outside the chamber's viewports, she could see the lights of integrated civilization spreading across the star system. Ships of impossible design moved between worlds that existed in multiple dimensions, carrying beings whose very existence had been thought lost to time. Sarah Chun, the last anchor of humanity's temporal intervention, had awakened to prevent a catastrophe and discovered instead the seeds of transformation. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps, Vexthera thought, that was exactly what it needed to become something greater than any of them had dared to hope. The eyes that had opened after millennia of sleep had seen not just the return of the lost, but the birth of the unprecedented. And in that vision, there was finally hope for a future worth preserving.